Welcome in, Hawks fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for another Bleav in Hawks episode. And as we continue to get through the dog days of summer in the league, you know me, churning out content, bringing on another special guest today. If you watch us on YouTube, you can see him through audio. Special guest, David Lee. You may have seen him on Twitter, DLee43. Also a person who has been credentialed to Hawks games and events as well. So he's been around the team a little bit too. So I appreciate you, my guy. He also does film breakdowns. You can check out his YouTube as well, DLee43 as well, if you want to check all that out. If you haven't come across his content or seen him before. But David, welcome in, man. How are you?
Man, I'm good. I'm so happy you reached out. And, like you said, we may be in the dog days, but I always have time to talk about the Hawks. And there's still a lot of things to talk about, things up in the air. But I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yes, sir. Look forward to you. Give me some of your insight, man. What you think on some things? It's always good to get other opinions on what's happening with the team, 100%. Man. Let's just go ahead and dive right into it. Well, last episode I talked about Jalen Johnson, and this episode I want to talk about the head guy, the franchise player, Trae Young, a man who some people wondered what his future would be in Atlanta with all the rumors after this past season, but it looks like he is here to stay another year in the meantime, and hopefully for years to come for a lot of Hawks fans. So my first question to you, man, is now that Trae is back in the role pre-DeJounte, where he will be I don't want to say he's the sole ball handler, but we know he'll be the dominant ball handler, right? The true number one guy on this team, leader of this team. There's no debating that. I'm just wondering, what do you think of that for him this season? Do you think last time we seen him, everybody remembers the Miami Heat series and that makes some people nervous, but what do you think of where they are now? Obviously different coach, different system, some different players around him now, back as the number one guy on this team.
Yeah, I mean, and I can understand why that'd be a point of concern for some people. Like you said, last time we saw him in the playoffs without someone to take that pressure off of him, he was like quite literally just abysmal in all aspects, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But this is a vastly different team. That 2022 roster was very rigid in the way that they played around Trae. You didn't have a lot of flexibility in terms of people who get their shot off. Like outside of DeAndre Hunter in Game 5, like nobody was able to create, right, for themselves, or certainly not for other people. And now that when you look at this roster, you're looking at length, you're looking at versatility, but you're looking at a lot of different options and flexibility that Quinn Snyder could put on the floor. But at the core, it's still length and shooting, which is what it was in 2022. And so I think a lot of people are underrating not just the Hawks, but what Trae will do this season. This is probably the best role for his personal production, but also with the way this team is constructed right now, they're going to need him to be as special as he has been the entirety of his career. I understand the concerns. I think you're going to need to see a lot more Bogdanovic, and I'm not really concerned about his ability to facilitate. He's if you watch him in the Olympics, or if you've watched him in his role with the Hawks, he's capable of doing that second side creation, looking for guys, but also getting his own shot. But we're also going to need some jumps from guys like Dyson Daniels and Jalen Johnson. Jalen is still, I think, a little bit further than people may realize. I think he's, of course, has unreal potential, but in the half court, he's still a little bit tentative. He doesn't really exert force when he's in the half court. A lot of times he's going to that fadeaway or not necessarily embracing contact. So still a lot of growth for him, which is a good thing, because we're saying like he hasn't hit that ceiling yet. But there's going to be some questions because that's a lot of usage that you're missing from DeJounte, right? So you're probably going to need to replace about 15 to 18 shots a game, and that's also the secondary ball handler. So I think it'll be shared between Bogdan, Dyson Daniels, and Jalen Johnson. But I absolutely feel like this is probably going to be one of Trae's best season yet. I don't think people realize how incredible of a shooting season he was having. He shot a 38.3% on about 7 pull-up threes per game, and that's the second highest among players that took at least 6, tied with Steph Curry. And then off the catch, he took two a game, and he shot almost 40%. So an unreal shooting season. Of course, we know the assist and the playmaking has always been there for him. I think he's sort of putting it together and getting a little bit more off ball. And so as long as that continues to be instilled and he continues to embrace that, and guys are able to be comfortable and look for him when he's off the ball as well, I think this is going to be a much better season than certainly the national media is projecting us, because like a 36.5 over under, I think that's blatantly disrespectful. I think this team is better than they were last season. Again, not an indictment on DeJounte as a player, but just a fit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think fit was the biggest thing. Now, I think one person that will play a big part, and someone who's been paired with Trae, has been Quinn Snyder. I mean, we've talked about, all of us have talked about, I'm sure, about Quinn and Trae's relationship and what they mean to each other. I remember Shams going on Jeff Teague's podcast and talking about how they both basically feel like they need each other to win in Atlanta. obviously when Nate was the coach, he ran a different system. You kind of hinted at it about just the way the team was around him during that Miami Heat series. Quinn is more what some people would say a more modern NBA offense,
Right.
creative concepts, good motion, things like that, very value spacing, and etc. Can you maybe talk about Quinn's impact for Trae, especially in a year where Trae is that guy again, pre-DeJounte, and how that could be beneficial, and how, with the fact that they're doing more things with other guys, wanting more off-ball movement and providing more shooting and versatility around him, could be beneficial for Trae. And even though, yes, he is, I guess if you want to say the solo guy, it's not exactly the exact same solo guy position that he was back under Nate Miller.
Yeah, 100%. I think like one thing I really loved from Quinn this season was his ability or his willingness to put the ball in the big man's hands. Now, of course, sometimes like Clint Capella, that isn't something he's ever been comfortable with, but he showed a lot of growth. Even Onyeka's a little bit more comfortable with it. They put him in the slot. They'd have him run dribble handoffs. They'd have Trae get off the ball to start the possession. Then he'll run around, curl around and pin down, get into the handoff. It's just little things like that. And that's really important because another reason outside of just the roster why we struggled so bad in that 2022 playoffs is that it was predictable. It's going to be a high screen pick and roll. It's going to be double drag. It's going to be Trae operating in ISO. It wasn't a lot of offensive malleability. And that's why I think Trae feels that same way about Quinn Snyder, because he knows it's not just going to be a single style of basketball that's sustainable. I mean, in Dallas, Luka had to get away from that a little bit. He had to trust Kyrie Irving. He had to like embrace attacking the rim, being in the post. Like when you get to the highest levels of the game and you start to really like try and contend for championships, the style of play that may be best for you or that you're most comfortable with isn't always going to be what's best for the team or what's best for your ability to contend. And I think that we're starting to see, again, I saw some people debating that he didn't get off the ball enough with DeJounte, and I completely disagree. I think if anything, he showed a lot more growth in that than I would have expected. So absolutely, I think Quinn and Trae are synonymous when it comes to success for the Hawks. Like they're both going to have to trust each other. But it also means that, okay, yes, Trae wanted to come off the ball last season, but who was that player looking for him on that pass, right? It wasn't always DeJounte, but now you have someone who's a lot more talented, at least in my opinion, and running, or at least has the ability to be more talented. Like, not to respect DeJounte, but I think Dyson Daniels has that ability to be that second side initiator, be that same guy to make those really smart reads. But he's going to be a more low usage offensive player. He's not going to bog the offense down. He's going to look for guys, things like that. So I think all the moves that the Hawks have made, even Reza Shea, like this is more length, low usage, hyper efficient basketball, quick decisions, get Trae off the ball. Let's take a bunch of threes. And that means Dyson's going to have to get more shots up. I mean, Jalen's going to have to get more shots up. But ultimately, I think this is the way that Quinn wants to play. And I think it's the most sustainable way to build around Trae going forward. And then you just have to see what the other guys fit in and see how they grow. But I absolutely agree. I think Quinn is probably like Quinn and Trae, of course, are like the linchpin of this team going into the next season and going forward. Like they're going to be the players and the coach that are going to define this era of Hawks basketball. So I absolutely agree.
Yeah, and I think too, with Quinn and his thought process, I think he knows, okay, this is my guy's strengths. This is how we can best, like you said, build this team to move forward. Now, one of the big things that I think people were concerned about at that time was the backup point guard position,
right?
And how when Trae would come off the floor, that always wasn't great for Atlanta. They struggle offensively or just continue to output a certain amount of offensive efficiency. Now, obviously, you've mentioned guys like Jalen, low usage guys like Dyson, Risha Shea potentially could be a low usage guy. I mean, even Kobe Buffkin as well. I mean, I've said that I feel like they're in a better position now to have secondary playmakers, and again, because there will be times where Trae will come off the floor, but still be able to maintain a certain level offensively where they can still be productive. Obviously you're not going to be as productive when one of the best playmakers in the league is off the floor, but still to a point where you can still be successful. Can you just talk about the fits around him? Because I think that's one of the things that I think hurt the team the last couple of years, is that the fit of certain players on the team wasn't great. And so that kind of bogged down the team at times. And obviously we can go into the DeJounte Trae fit. We can go into, John Collins' fit and, the Clint Capella thing and everything like that. But now, with some of the additions and some of the, obviously Dyson coming onto the team, Risha Shea and et cetera, and some young guys stepping up this year, would you say the fit is better? Would you say that's what they're banking on this year to help improve the team, is that everybody just, the cohesion is just going to be much better. And you'll see that in the way they play basketball.
Yeah, 100%. I dropped this on Brad's podcast earlier, and I've tweeted this as well, but that we've never seen an all-star duo be this bad on the floor together. Since I went back to 2004 and I looked at every all-star duo, their net rating, which is just the difference between the offensive and the defensive rating. Trae and the Johnson were a negative 2.6. There's only 2 other negative all-star duos, and they were a minus 0.1 and like a minus 0.2. So like there's no precedence for guys that are supposed to be all-star level players to be that bad together. And ultimately, it really comes down to both ends of the floor, mainly on the defensive end. I think DeJounte, to his credit, like he's a great isolation scorer. He was actually by like possession, by efficiency, he was maybe the best in the entire NBA last season. His mid-range pull-up is automatic. But when you have one player sort of like dictating the flow when Trae's off the floor, I don't think that's how you provide the offensive value that you need with him off the floor. And like you said it earlier too, like once you take a great offensive player off the floor, of course, like your offense is going to fall a little bit, but it can't be a crater. And that's how it's been for the past, I like forever, since Trae's ascension to being a star level player. And so I want to ask you as well, but I think it's going to be by committee. I think Kobe will probably be the backup. I think Dyson will see some looks. I think Bogey will see some looks as the primary ball handler. But who do you think is going to sort of get that designation as backup ball handler? And do you think that Kobe, I think he's ready, but do you think that Kobe is ready? And if not, do you think we should be looking into some other options like around the veterans? I think some guys are still available, like a Markelle Fultz. Is that like sort of where you're trending, or do you feel confident in Kobe's ability to step up and do that?
When it comes to Kobe, I mean, for me, I think you one of the biggest things he brings is point of attack defense, which is already one of the most important things. So that in itself can get him on the floor. And I think biggest thing too is I think learning how to play through NBA pressure. I think there were times last year where teams, I can't remember the exact team, but there was a team that kind of put pressure on him. And I remember Quinn took him out of the game and we didn't see him again. Because I think that's still something he's working on. Obviously, he's still working on his mid-range. That's one of his like shot profiles, mid-range shot, being able to get to the rim, things like that. I think he is ready to go. And listen, again, these are young players. None of these guys have reached their ceilings. You know, that's the thing about this team. There's a lot of young talent that has a lot of developing to do. And that's something that Quinn and their staff is really, in tune in, is developing their guys. That's some reason why when they fired Nate, they said, we want somebody who develops, because they knew this is probably the direction they were going to take. We're going to have a lot of young players here, but a lot of young players who fit our player profile and that can end up being great. And so I think Kobe's one of those guys. And I mean, I think for Kobe, the biggest thing is just, whether he's on the floor with Bogey or Dyson, he'll never just be the sole person where it's like he has to be the only person who can handle the ball. You can see through the transactions they've made, they've given multiple secondary ball handlers. And we haven't even talked about Jalen's ability to create. I think he's a great connector when it comes to plays. And I think for Kobe, I think he's ready to grow into that spot, get that experience. What he's bringing defensively. Obviously, you want to see what he can bring to you offensively off the bench. Obviously, you're not needing him to give you a ton. I mean, you could maybe say you need him to be more like a DeLon Wright. Maybe was. Obviously, that DeLon and Trae had a positive plus minus when they played together, especially when DeLon started finding his shot later in the year. So I think for Kobe, I think he's in a good position right now. Obviously, the biggest thing for him is staying healthy. And if he can stay healthy, I think we would be in a good spot at that point, backup point guard position. And listen, I've even posed the question, what if, Trae sits, because I mean, listen, most guys don't play 82 games anymore. So there's probably going to be a game or two or multiple where you don't have Trae or you don't have Kobe, maybe playing in a game, right? Guys get banged up. All right, take the night off, and then you got to go to that next guy, whether that is a Keaton Wallace, if they bring him up and let him play on the roster, or if that is Bogey, because he used to do that in the East Conference Finals run. He used to play some point guard. I think that's going to be really where we have to kind of see where this team goes from that perspective. But I'm sure Quinn has a plan in that regard to kind of dictate what that looks like. I think that overall it's going to be by committee. It's not going to be, it's pretty much Trae Young and we ain't got nobody else. it's like, hey, we're going to have multiple guys who can kind of do something within a system and still lead the team to be productive, I'd say.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. And I almost forgot Keaton Wallace. Like, that's another guy that I think could step up, play some minutes, really good G League player. But I feel like the Summer League, man, I feel like that would have been a big sort of like confidence boost for Hawks fans to see Kobe operate in that setting. he's so good with pace. He's very under control. I love his decision making. And he would have also just made it a little bit easier for Muhammad Gay, Jurisic, Zachary Zeshay. So honestly, I think like in terms of his development, I don't think it's a huge misstep, but I think in terms of like as Hawks fans feeling a little bit more confident in his ability to play that role, I think that was a big miss. And it's like because I feel like what I see in Kobe is like I'm just in generally like an optimist. Like I think I like the process of taking him. I love him as a prospect. He was one of the few players in that draft class who was really good at getting to the rim, but like self-generated. Like less than 25% of his shots at the rim were assisted. So he's shown an ability to consistently get there. He shot above 60% at the rim. He shot 40% from mid-range, nearly 40% from three. So like a really talented prospect, super skilled, and then also extremely solid defensively. And I think now that you have, again, a lot of options, like Kobe and Dyson together is going to give opposing backcourts nightmares. Like it's going to be a significant change from the type of pressure that we have on perimeter. You all have V. Krejci as well. Like he's a dog defender. He's going to get after. He's going to pick up full court. We really have three guys who can give some real resistance at the point of attack after we had zero. Kobe played some spot minutes, but he was hurt for the rest of the year. So I think people aren't really realizing how much, first off, that defensive help is going to help the centers and sort of help our overall defensive scheme. It also means that Quinn Snyder isn't going to have to run super aggressive schemes to compensate for the lack of defense at the perimeter. But then also just is going to lessen the load for Trae Young offensively. Like it's just like on both ends of the floor, it makes too much sense for people to be a little bit lower on the Hawks than I think they are right now. And I honestly would not be surprised if this team is a lot better than people think they are. And I think this is probably going to be Trae Young's best year yet. And we're talking about a season where he just had a phenomenal 3-point shooting season as well. So yeah, I mean, I'm honestly excited. I think it's going to remind everyone how great he is, but also just like this collection of young talent, like you've talked about. I mean, there's a lot of different positions spread across different drafts, all types of skill sets. But they're building something that like finally makes sense. Like I really wanted to like that DeJounte Murray trade, and I loved it in the moment. It's just mainly because like as a Hawks fan, we don't get players like that. You know what I mean? So it's like wow, we finally got an all-star to join us. Like we didn't have to draft him. I had rose-colored glasses on. I saw what I wanted to see. I think the Hawks felt the same way. Like they was like, okay, well, maybe this is what this could be. But in terms of making up for that sort of like a bad decision, because it is what it is at this point, I think they did a great job. They recouped some draft pick value. They brought in a guy who makes more sense next to Trae. Larry Nance isn't a bum either. So it's like there's a lot to like about this season. And I think it's going to be sort of a redemption season for like both the team, but for Trae Young in general, because I don't think his rep has ever been lower, which is kind of funny because it's like we're normalizing 25-10 for 4 seasons. Like, you know what I mean? So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so funny you say that because you're right. People see the 28, 27, 25 and 10 and just kind of like that's nothing. But yeah, somebody else could do it. And now it's the greatest thing ever. And I know, we're not going to get to the Tyrese Halliburton debates and all that. We know people and all that. But, I think, Trae does get, the short end of the stick in the league a lot, and I think that for him, this is a great chance for him to be put back in this position and really have a bounce back year. Now, one thing I do want to ask about Trae is what are your expectations for him? What do you want to see out of Trae Young this year that you feel like if I see this, he's that guy. Like this is the Trae we need, and he's definitely maybe even taking another step forward or just better a way he plays, just much better for overall team success. What do you want to see out of Trae Young?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think like I'll start like with the intangibles. Like this wasn't the last season, but in 2022, you could see him sometimes be a little bit frustrated when like Jalen would bring the ball up or stuff like that. And so I think he knows that this team is best with the ball in his hands. 100%, I get it. But there's so many guys on this team. Dyson Daniels needs a lot of confidence built into him, in terms, especially offensively. Like absolutely a fantastic defender. He was a lot better offensively in the Olympics as well. But he's very tentative at times. Like everything I watched from him as soon as we acquired him, times where he picked the ball up, times where he didn't attack open lanes because he just doesn't feel like it's like he doesn't have the privilege to do so. I think he kind of still has that role player mentality. So he needs to be empowering the young guys, first off. But in terms of like the actual basketball play, I think we saw a little bit of a dip in his ability to like attack the rim. At his frame, it's only so much you can do sometimes, but we've also seen him perform better under those same circumstances, getting to the rim a little bit more, finishing a little bit more consistently. I think that will help with the added spacing. Saddiq Bey was, as much as I loved him, everything he put on the floor, played his heart out. And it sucks what happened to him. He was a really, really bad corner 3-point shooter, which meant teams could shrink the floor way too easily, especially with Clint Capella on the floor. And so, again, that kind of goes back to roster construction, but I love to see him grow as a finisher. I think he got stronger 100%, and he had a little bit of bump finishes. He has like absorbing a little bit more contact around the rim. So I think I want to see him grow as a finisher. I want to see him grow as a leader. And then I also want to see him sort of just even ramp up that 3-point volume more. Like, he had such a great shooting season. I think some of those mid-range pull-ups, that you need that in your bag. You can add on another one 3 per game, another 1.5 3-point attempt per game. And I think we're looking at one of the greatest high-volume 3-point shooting seasons ever. Like, a lot of guys are taking that high-volume pull-up threes, but they're also not taking them from 35 feet. So his ability to continue to get more and more up, that's going to stretch the defense a little bit more. It's going to change the geometry of the court. But yeah, that's what I'm looking for. I'm not really expecting. I will say I think like his numbers will look a lot better. Is there anything like in particular you're expecting, or what are you looking for?
I mean, really the biggest thing is just kind of seeing how he adapts to kind of, like I said, being in a role where he is the main cog again, and he can help get the engine going. I think one thing, especially in that Boston series, there was one game, obviously, they played without DeJounte, and you could tell that series, a lot of the success they had was based off his decision making.
Right.
His decision making really has to be at a high level in the role that Quinn may need him to play at times, especially now without DeJounte. And obviously, you have other guys like Jalen that you want to take the pressure off of him, and other guys who can do that. But I just want to see his growth as a decision maker. Obviously, every player has bad habits. So is he still going to take a bad shot here and there? Yes. I mean, that's just every star, even star players have bad habits. But just, being more efficient. I've always said that's something that I think is the next part of his game, is becoming a more efficient basketball player. Because he really, if he's efficient, then he can hit hard numbers from prime hard numbers if he can get to that level. That's usually the biggest thing, is just the efficiency. And like you mentioned, like with shooting, after that slump he had at the beginning of the year, he was able to start heating up. So if he's able to do that on a more consistent basis, I'm really excited to kind of see what that then turns into for a team. Because now you'll have teams going back, because teams are probably going to attack him, trap him, double team him, things like that. They're going to go back to that defense and say, okay, let's see if anybody else on your team can beat us. So I think that to me is, going to be big for him. It's just, decisions he makes on the court, how he reads things, and just adapt. Because I also think one of the best things you saw in that Boston series is the adaptation. He adapted from games 1 and 2 through games 3 and 6, which led to him having one of the stronger playoff performances that he's had. So just seeing the growth throughout the season with some of the new guys and how the team comes together around him, and then seeing how that projects to wins on the floor for the team.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I wanted to say something just about that Celtics series. He had 62 points in the fourth quarter, which is nuts because it was a 6-game series. That's also the most that any player has ever had in the fourth quarter in a 6-game series. So unbelievably productive. That fourth quarter masterclass he had to force a game 6 was like, I think the epitome of what he can be when the shot is on. I think he's like coming out of pick and roll. There's not many players that are better. He's led the league in like points per game generated off of pick and rolls pretty much since 2020. He just finished the season where he generated 52.8 points per game off his baskets and then his assist points. That's like a top 10 season. He has 2 top 10 seasons in that metric. So when we talk offensive production, there's really no one like Trae. Now, if you match that with efficiency, now we're talking about an all-time great season, and I 100% get that. But I would say, like, I think sometimes the bad shots, like, give him that, they provide that spacing that, if they know he's going to take a shot like that, then it's like, okay, maybe we have to defend a little bit differently. But I 100% get it. Like, there are some inefficient shots he can get outside of, like, his arsenal. Like, I mentioned a little bit about the mid-range, but sometimes he'll jack a half-court 3, 20 seconds on the shot clock, and you're like, do we really need that? Or is that the best shot that we could have gotten that possession? So, yeah, so some of the habits can definitely be cleaned up. I think he's going to have more ownership, like, because you don't have that fail-safe to just say, okay, DeJounte, go get a bucket. Like you said, he's going to have that responsibility to orchestrate a lot more than he did with DeJounte on the team. But I think he's also going to have to learn how to trust the guys around him to be like, okay, well, if they're going to trap me, then I need you to be able to beat them. And I think, with their collection of guys around them, whether it's Bogey or Jalen Johnson, I think they can make it happen. So,
yeah, I think that's what they're hoping for, is that just every piece fits together where, if something like that happens, then Trae can turn to those guys and they can make plays. And that obviously would be huge for the success of this team this year if that's able to happen, especially if it comes off turnovers. And I also hope, obviously, they're much better in the fast break as well. Because I've always felt like that's something they could be better at, because I feel like they have the guys, especially the guys who can run, and, either whether that's Bogey at the 3 or Jalen towards the rim, and et cetera. And, speaking of Jalen, I wanted to ask about just the duo of Trae and Jalen. Obviously, it's been pretty much Trae and DeJounte the last couple of years, right? And Jalen really had his first real year of playing last year, kind of integrating and growing himself within the team. Now it seems like they're saying, Jalen Johnson, you're the number 2 guy. How do you see that duo doing this year? Because now you see in the league at times, players or teams, when they have 2 stars, they'll play through each other. And obviously before they were trying to figure out how does DeJounte and Trae play through each other. Now it's going to be how does Trae and Jalen play through each other. So what are your expectations for those 2 guys now? Is they're going to be potentially in certain situations like, hey, we got to rely on you 2 to get us where we need to go?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question. And like, I don't necessarily feel like he's ready to be a second option. And that's not me saying he's bad or anything. It's just more so like, if we're going to be honest, like that's a lot to ask of him. Like you said, this is really his first season and really playing real minutes. This was essentially like, of course, he's going into his 4th year, right? I believe going to his 4th year, but the first 2 seasons he didn't play much. Shout out Nate McMillan. So it's like he's always had like a little bit of a stunted development to his season. He didn't play at Duke either, so it's like, yes, we can have these expectations of him. Yes, that might be his role on this team, but I think like the true number 2 option is Bogey. And that it doesn't matter if Bogey starts next to Trae or not. I think the guy who's probably going to take the second most shots is Bogey. Unless Jalen surprises me. I just don't think that – I don't want to put a cap on his ceiling, but I think like going into this season, you're going to have to see a lot of growth from him as like an actual half-court offensive player. His numbers like outside of the half court are like pretty good. He has a really nice turnaround fadeaway. He's of course like an absolute demon in transition, but there's still a lot of growth that he needs to do in the half court. And I think that's fine to say. Like, I just want people to be like sort of realistic when it comes to what we're asking him. Like I'll just pull the numbers real quick, but like he shot a pretty high percentage at the rim, right? Like he shot, 61.7%, right? But when you look at half court, he shot like -3%. And that doesn't seem like a huge difference, but it's really with the layups, because his layup in the half court was at 44.7%, and it's like 3% less than it was overall. So it's like there's things that he needs to grow into. I don't think he's the level of shot creator that you would want from a number 2 player at this point. But what he absolutely can do is, like, let's say they're running a pick and roll with Trae. He's going to slip the screen because they might double him. He hits him on the bounce pass. Now you have Jalen Johnson playing 4-on-3. That's really scary for a defense because he's such a great passer. He has great touch around the rim. If you have a big man pinching in, now you got to kick out to the wing. There's a lot of scenarios where Jalen just makes sense as that guy to set a handoff or a screen for Trae, because he's an immediate pressure reliever. Like I called him like the perfect pressure valve for Trae because he's so athletic. But he's also really cerebral when he reads the game. And so when he's catching that ball on the open floor, it's almost like Draymond Green-esque, not to say he's Draymond's level passer, but it's more so in terms of like a guy that you can trust to make the right decision as he's rolling into space. So I wouldn't say to expect so much of him as like an actual shot creator for himself, but I do think he'll be a lot better in that role, catching swing passes, attacking closeouts, being confident shooting the ball. He shot the ball really well from 3 this year. Again, he shot the ball pretty well from the mid-range. It's just more so, okay, can he get to the rim and can he finish more efficiently at a 6'10" frame? He's too athletic to have to be shooting 44% on layups. And that needs to be above 50%. And that will come with time. Like I said, he's like a super immature 4th-year player. Like someone that good, he was kind of at sometimes just coasting on talent. I feel like it wasn't like a Reed type thing, because he has the talent to make those fadeaway jumpers, but I want him to actually exert force. And once he learns how to exert force, think about someone like Apollo, Julius Randle, guys who like back to the basket game, they're able to finish through contact. That's what I envision him as. It's not necessarily a guy who's going to be creating on the perimeter. I want him to be like, okay, I'm in the post, or I'm going to attack this guy off the dribble, but I'm not going to be like necessarily running pick and roll. That's not, I could see it, which is more so like, I think with his frame, his skill set, his athleticism, he's going to draw a lot of attention in the paint. So why not try and utilize him a little bit closer to the basket? But he has to get stronger. Like if you look at his frame, like he's very like, I don't know, he's like not a track star, but more so like he's very like light in his legs, like in his base. You know what I mean? So he's not like a guy who can back down a player at this point. But I think like letting him see like how Pascal Siakam operates, or Paulo, or Julius Randle, I think that's where they need to project him to be. And then eventually you're going to find that secondary perimeter creator down the line. But not to just shoehorn him into that role, but just more so understanding that, okay, let me leverage my size, my length, my athleticism, my versatility, and still be able to put the ball on the floor. But yeah, I mean, that was a lot to say that I think he can eventually grow into it, but I don't think he's going to be that level creator this season.